She wanted comfort. But his dangerous touch ignited forbidden desire. The colony ship drifted through the void like a dying whale, and Maya Brooks stood at the observation deck, watching the stars blur into streams of light, because nobody told her that space would feel this empty, or that loneliness could wrap around her bones like ice on metal. And she pressed her palm against the cold glass, wondering if anyone back on Earth even remembered her name anymore since 3 years had passed. In hyperspace, which meant 30 years had gone by back home and everyone she loved was either old or dead or had simply moved on with their lives. She was the youngest engineer on the vessel at 24, and the others treated her like a child, even though her hands had repaired more hull breaches than any of them, and her mind could calculate trajectory adjustments faster than the outdated ship computer. But none of that mattered because she was small and soft-spoken, and they all assumed she needed protecting, which made her want to scream into the endless black outside, except sound did not travel in vacuum. So even her rage would die unheard. The ship shuddered and alarms wailed through the corridors, and Maya ran toward the engine room because that was what she did when everything fell apart, and the captain was shouting over the comm system about unidentified vessels approaching, and her heart hammered against her ribs like it wanted to escape her chest before whatever was coming could reach them first. When the hull breach came, it tore through Section 7 like paper, and the emergency bulkhead slammed down, trapping Maya on the wrong side with dying lights and failing oxygen. And she thought this was how it ended, alone in a metal coffin floating through space. But then the wall peeled open like someone had unzipped reality itself, and she saw them. They were not what humanity expected, because all the movies and books had prepared Earth for little green men or insectoid horrors, but these beings looked almost human except taller, and their skin held an iridescent quality that shifted between violet and deep blue, depending on the angle of light, and their eyes were too large and too dark, like pools of liquid night, but their faces held something familiar, something that made Maya think of ancient statues and forgotten gods. The first one who entered moved with impossible grace, and Maya stumbled backward until her spine hit the wall because fight or flight did not cover this scenario, and her training had never included what to do when beautiful aliens tore through your ship like it was made of tissue paper. He stopped when he saw her, and his head tilted in a gesture that felt universal and curious, and Maya realized she was holding her breath, like if she stayed perfectly still he might not notice her, even though his eyes were already locked on hers with an intensity that made her skin prickle with something that was not quite fear. He spoke, and the sounds that came from his mouth were melodic and strange, but then a device on his wrist glowed, and his words shifted into English that felt almost right, except the rhythm was off, like someone singing a familiar song in the wrong key, and he said, "Do not be afraid," which was exactly what someone should not say if they actually wanted you to calm down. Maya tried to speak, but her throat had closed up, so she just shook her head and pressed harder against the wall, and he moved closer with careful steps like he was approaching a wounded animal. And maybe that was exactly what she was in this moment, small and scared and trapped. His hand reached toward her and Maya flinched, but he did not touch her. Instead, his fingers moved through the air near her face, and warmth bloomed across her skin like invisible fire. And suddenly she could breathe again, and the pain in her chest from the thin air faded, and she gasped and looked at him with wide eyes. "You were dying," he said simply, and his voice held no emotion. But something in his dark eyes seemed almost concerned, and Maya wanted to thank him, but also wanted to demand what gave him the right to board their ship and tear through their hull and decide who lived or died. "The ship is breaking," he continued, and looked around the damaged corridor with something like distaste. "And you should not be traveling in this." And his hand gestured at the sparking wires and buckled metal, and Maya felt defensive anger flare. Because yes, their ship was old, and yes, it was falling apart, but it was theirs, and it was taking them somewhere new, somewhere they could start over. More of his kind appeared through the breach, and they moved through the corridor like liquid shadow, and Maya saw other crew members being gathered. And no one was fighting, because what could bullets do against beings who could peel through reinforced hull plating with their bare hands? The tall one, who had saved her breathing, stayed close, and Maya noticed things about him in fractured moments between panic, like how his armor seemed to be part of his skin, rather than separate clothing, and how he moved without sound, and how when he looked at her his eyes tracked across her face like he was memorizing every detail. They were taken to the alien ship, which was not really a ship at all, but something alive and breathing with walls that pulsed softly and floors that felt warm beneath Maya's feet, and the air smelled like ozone and something sweet she could not name, and every human instinct screamed wrong, wrong, wrong. But her scientific mind whispered fascinating, and she hated how curious she felt when she should be terrified. The aliens separated them, and Maya panicked and grabbed for the nearest crew member, but strong hands caught her waist and lifted her easily. And she was looking into those dark eyes again, and he said, "You are safe here," which was a lie because nothing about this was safe but his hands on her waist were gentle and warm through her uniform. And Maya stopped struggling. He carried her through corridors that curved in ways that hurt to look at, and brought her to a chamber that was empty, except for something like a bed. Except it hovered and glowed with soft light, and he set her down carefully and stepped back and said, "Rest." And Maya laughed because how could anyone rest when their entire world had just been turned inside out? She asked where her crew was, and he said they are being cared for, and she asked what he wanted. And he paused like the question confused him and said, "We want nothing." And she said, "Everyone wants something." And he moved closer and said, "Perhaps you are correct." His name was unpronounceable, so he told her to call him Cade, which was the closest English approximation, and Maya told him her name and watched him repeat it slowly, like he was tasting each letter, and something about hearing her name in his strange melodic voice made her stomach flutter, in a way that felt dangerous. Days passed, or what felt like days, because time was strange on the alien vessel, and Maya learned their ship had been dying faster than anyone knew, and the hull would have ruptured completely within hours, and everyone would have frozen in the void, and Cade people had saved them even though humanity had never asked for rescue. She spent hours with Cade because he seemed fascinated by her, and he asked endless questions about Earth and humans and why they traveled so far in such fragile vessels, and Maya answered because what else could she do? And slowly the fear faded into something else, something warm that pooled in her chest whenever he entered the room. He touched her. Sometimes small, careful touches, like he was testing boundaries, and Maya knew she should pull away because this was wrong on so many levels. But his fingers on her wrist made her pulse race, and when he brushed hair from her face, she leaned into the contact before she could stop herself. One night, or what passed for night, she woke to find him sitting near her watching with those dark eyes, and she should have been afraid. But instead she sat up and asked why he was there. And he said, "You were distressed in your sleep." And Maya realized she had been dreaming of Earth, of everything she lost, and tears were wet on her cheeks. Cade reached out, and his thumb brushed away the moisture, and he studied it with curiosity and said, "Humans leak when sad." And Maya laughed wetly and said, "Yes, we do." And he said, "I do not like when you leak." And something about his blunt honesty made her chest ache. She leaned forward without thinking and pressed her forehead against his shoulder, seeking comfort from the only being who had shown her consistent kindness in this strange new reality. And Cade went very still, and then his arms came around her slowly, carefully, like he was afraid she might break. His body was warmer than humans, and his chest did not rise and fall with breath the way hers did, and nothing about this should feel right. But Maya felt safer than she had in years, and she pressed closer, and his arms tightened, and she felt him breathe in her scent, even though he did not need to breathe. When she tilted her head back to look at him, his face was closer than expected, and his eyes had darkened even further, and one of his hands came up to cup her jaw, and his thumb traced her lower lip, and Maya forgot how to breathe for an entirely different reason. "This is forbidden," he said softly. And Maya whispered, "Why?" And he said, "Because you are human and I am not, and our kind should not touch like this." And Maya said, "We are already touching." And something in his expression shifted, hungry and restrained all at once. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Maya did not move, and when his mouth brushed hers, it was softer than expected, and strange because his lips were warmer and the angles were slightly wrong, but heat exploded through her body, and she gasped against his mouth. Cade made a sound low in his chest and pulled her closer and kissed her harder. And Maya stopped thinking about right or wrong or what this meant, and just felt, and his hands were in her hair, and